Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first video of my Civilization series. Today, I already had a plan. I mentioned it yesterday, well, in my last video, where I am going to be playing as Age of Imperialism, a mod for Civilization 3 complete, and a general overhaul to make the world pretty much World War I. Well, relatively before World War I. So, I mulled over the decision of what first country I should play in this series, and so far, I figured I'd go with the tried and true method of the United States, which, at this point in time, was just starting out its imperialistic roots, where it has just claimed Hawaii, Alaska, and the decisions that I make during this playthrough will determine how this game's going to go. So, I usually play this mod primarily for the conquest victory, which is just to eliminate most of the players, or I should say the AI, generally speaking, the AI. So, we're going to be doing that pretty much that. So, how to pretty much beat the game is by taking at least 60 to 70% of the world. So that's pretty much all we're going to do is just conquest. Build up and conquer. That's the whole standard. Now, playing as the United States, we start off with a very, very small navy. This was before we had our navy production ramp up to a certain degree. So we start off with a very, very small, not very big navy to contend with. But we do have a lot of good units right out the start too. Being an imperial power in this game means a lot of tech and a lot of units. And with a lot of units comes prospects of domination. Now, it doesn't matter. There's no set AI. There's no set limits to what you can do and what you can't do. Pretty much just go do whatever you want. Basically, it's a sandbox, which is most Civilization games anyway, is just sandbox. Play the way you want. There is no right, there is no wrong, it's just how you wish to play it. And how I generally play this mod in particular, well, as United States, is pretty much take over the rest of the take over the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. So, North America, South America, and expand out. But I'm going to play things a little differently than what I normally do. Instead of doing just straight taking Mexico first round and going at it from there, I'm actually going to build up a decent sized navy at the start. And from the start here, I will be making beeline gains for China, the Philippines, Cuba. I'm going to start as many wars as I can before things get a little too rowdy. Because after a while, the game does get rowdy. As in, a lot of countries will start declaring war left and right. There's going to be a point in the game, in this series, where there's just going to be endless war. And it's going to get very bogged down quite a lot. I will say that right now, is that it will get pretty crazy. But that's kind of what we're aiming for, is crazy, right? That's pretty much what makes games entertaining, and a game such as this is only entertaining as much as the player makes it entertaining. Now, most players generally don't kind of rush to war and stuff like that. I do, personally. If I'm going against China, I want to make sure that I take China before they build up an actual army. With powers like Spain and stuff like that, since they're a colonial power, they gain a lot of raw resources. I will be gaining a lot of raw resources, but I won't be using the raw resources as it applies to the score victory, which will take a very, 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 very long time, and I genuinely do not care to play a game for a very, very, very long time if that's going to be the normal case. So instead, I'm just going to get prepared with naval armaments at the ready, build everything up, select my research. Obviously, the best way to handle research is pretty simple in this mod, which is just to rush for basically all of this at the very beginning. We'll go like this, and this is pretty much all you need, because this gives you stuff that pretty much makes everything faster, and this is pretty much how you start. Well, how I personally start. You don't need to start like this. You can go your own pace. Seems like already at the end of the first turn, Britain has ran in probably into a Portuguese ship by accident and decided to declare war. Now, as you can see, the only ships that we can technically build right now are the Indiana class and the Foot, or Fote class, which not very best. It's not the best, but it gets the job done. Now, the Indiana class is a pre-dreadnought, so it's sort of like a dreadnought, but not big until you get to the which one was it? The South Carolina class. The South Carolina class is one of the bigger ships that you get in this game, and it generally goes through the ages. So not only will you be pretty much learning all the different ship classes and stuff, you're also learning a lot of actual history. That's the best part about civilization games that are scenario ran like this, that involve a lot of history. It does give you a good idea as to what legitimately was used during those times. Now, I'm gonna beeline to China, but the thing is, I'm not going to attack China right away. I'm actually going to try and stop a very annoying superpower from actually becoming a very annoying superpower, and that's Japan. Japan can get very, very stupid very, very quickly. Now, I've played many Japanese games on this mod, and I can honestly tell you, it can get very, very annoying, and it can get very, very broken. Because Japan has a quirk in the mod. It's not often discussed, or is it mentioned, but there is a bug in pretty much every version of this mod where Japan can make its strongest units without needing a factory, which it can be extremely broken at times, and it can get very annoying when you're trying to do conquests and those things, because you don't expect it, but it's there, kind of deal. Now, the best way to approach it is by getting rid of them right away. Now, a lot of big colonial powers like Britain, Germany, France, America all have different types of units based on where they are situated. Now, a lot of situations kind of detail what kind of events will transpire, basically. And the biggest send-off sort of deal is the colonial troops versus your normal troops. So, like how I have here U.S. infantry, U.S. cavalry, those are industrial units that I have. So these industrial units, in air quotes, obviously air quotes, is the top of the line, requires industry, requires a lot of stuff to make it work. And they are very, very strong. They are very, very powerful. They can bulldoze units pretty easy, because they have very strong attack and very strong defense, because they don't require a whole lot to work with. Now, when it comes down to Colonial troops. Colonial troops are pretty much the same troops as the ones that you get with the industrial, but they're weaker. Very weak. They are not very strong. They can be easily pushed over. As you can see here, 12, 6, 10, 10, 10, 10, 11, 9. This is your attack, which is this first column, and your defense is in this column. It kind of shows you how beefy they are, how well they can defend, and how well they can attack. And depending on whether they have strong attack or weak attack, depends on how combat effective they are. Now, some units are stronger in offensive pushes and others not so much. Some are very strong in defense, while others are strong in offense. The idea is not to just bull rush cities like this, like I'm doing, which is probably just going to get every one of my landing troops decimated. But I'm willing to take the gamble because I'm just starting the game. So, not a very, very good situational start, but it's a work in progress. But I did get rid of one annoying unit, which is a Japanese infantry, which can be made in abundance. And they are very, very strong, very powerful units. At the gate, already a situation. Now, Japan in this mod has a nice-ish navy. It's not a great navy, but it's large. Very large. But normally, it doesn't really matter the navy in the very beginning. It's the late game that really matters the most. Because you want to declare wars. You definitely want to declare war. Constantly. And you do want to knock down barriers, knock down walls, knock down stuff that can make things trivial. And you want to soften up as much as you can of the enemy's navy before really dedicating troops to the cause. Now, since I'm at war on this side of the hemisphere, I am going to be focusing primarily on this side of the hemisphere. I think my first goal right now is to try and get Sendai and try to figure out what I'm going to do. So all the Japanese Navy are going to be moving to Iwo Jima and trying to take out Wake Island midway. So a lot of the Japanese Navy has moved down here, which makes this up here more vulnerable. And once I can get a landing, hopefully, and actually take Sendai, I can actually start pushing troops out. Now, it's not going to be fast at the very beginning until the city is quelled of its resistances. And that's when I can actually fully incorporate and definitely get the ball rolling. Now, America does start off pretty slow compared to other bigger powers like Japan, Britain, and France, and Germany. But America definitely does its historical. It's definitely its historical route where it snowballs into something very big, very large, very quickly when you get there. So that's pretty much the whole idea and the strategy for the United States. There is a lot of there's an in-game built an in-game version of a guide of guides that kind of tell you what you should prioritize, which way you should go, which route you should take. I listen and heed to those advices and stuff. I don't fully follow it word for word, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on and stuff. And it definitely does actually help. Very decent with ideas. Now, in the very early game, it's easy to solo everything because nothing really matters in the very beginning. But in the very late game, you definitely want to make friends, you definitely want to make allies, and you definitely want to make sure that you're paying units off fast. Um, Now, paying off units is actually pretty simple. You just build your economy and you just buy out unit production. It's a rush tactic, especially when you're at war. You want to get the ball rolling, you want to get all your units out there, and you want to get them on the front line as soon as possible. You want to make landings as soon as possible, and you want to gain ground as soon as possible. Because the AI in this mod can really build up too. And in the very, very late game, you'd have to contend with 20 to 30 to 50 to 70 different divisions, ships, and stuff. It becomes basically a big, giant wall of things that you have to burn through and push through. And it can definitely impede your speed. It can impede your game. It could slow your game down, so you kind of want to rush things a lot. Now, America back home is very important, and as well as abroad. Islands don't contribute a whole lot yet. Like, your colonies don't contribute a whole lot because you don't have a lot, basically, to begin with. But when you get the ball rolling, it definitely comes in clutch a lot later. So what I want to do right now is prioritize the West Coast for war, and I want to prioritize the East Coast for pretty much everything else. And that's kind of how you want to do things. You kind of want to have a system where things are relatively balanced out, where you have your priorities set for certain areas, certain locations, and certain, a lot of, organization takes place. Now, since they put all their ships inside the ports here, it protects the units from getting hit, which is why the AI does it. It doesn't matter if it loses its ships, it can lose ships all at once. It's not going to matter. What really matters is the units inside garrisoned. Since they won't be taken by naval bombardment, they won't be easily pushed over like you would be able to any other time. Until you get your landings and stuff like that. Now, taking Sendai gives us access to industry, which is a resource. And this resource allows us to build units that are definitely very worth having and can really pay off a lot in a later game. Now, if I take China right now, I'll have access to the colonial resource. Since China in this time is not industrialized, it doesn't have anything to work with. And with nothing to work with, I'll have colonial troops. Now, now a lot of like British troops, a lot of German troops, a lot of French troops will have colonial troops, and they are considered weaker. And weaker units are not really worth having. They're good as fodder, but nothing more than that. Which can be a bit of a pain in the butt to deal with, I admit. But when you have to deal with a lot of cannon fodder and a lot of different things that it's just one of those having cannon fodder for everything actually does help, but it can get very annoying and get very stress inducing on your system. Depending on your computer, this game is either friend or foe. I will admit, it's either friend or foe. Whether or not it can hold up. Now, most times for my computer and how I have my settings and stuff like that worked out and stuff, it can take it. It can take a lot of units on the field, but sometimes it don't. And sometimes it do, sometimes it don't. It just depends, and it is the breaks of the game of the matter at hand and stuff. Now, sometimes this game can be a little complicated. As you can see, it's trying to crash because I lost a steamship. But that's par for the course for uh old games like this. It's trying to register the turn and it's trying to crash at the same time. It doesn't mean that the turn is not still going, but it still is. I think it's primarily on my end for my computer, but it'll definitely come back. It just gotta give it a minute. Um, yeah, maybe. Oh boy, I might actually have to. Okay, there it goes. All right, it's still good. I think. I think it's still popped up on my screen as fine. Uh, we'll just pretend it didn't happen. So we'll just roll with the punches as we go. So we'll just pretend it didn't happen. It totally didn't happen. What you talk? It didn't happen. What do you mean it happened? I don't know what you're talking about. So we'll load these troops up and get them ready to go, rearing and ready to go. Now I won't have any problems with enemy naval landings and stuff like that because it don't really matter in the end because it will all work out. Um, Another good unit to have in this mod in particular is artillery, and a lot of artillery. So it definitely is. Just give me one moment. I gotta make sure that my stuff's actually working right and that's not gonna crash right off the gate. So, big artillery does play a big part in this. Howitzers, mountain guns, ship bombardments, all of it really does matter in this mod in particular. Now, in normal civilization cases, you can technically just rush things. You don't need to worry about having artillery. It does help. I won't ignore the advantages of not having artillery and having artillery. So, but usually a lot of games don't prioritize the need for artillery. Now, the person who made this mod, which is El Justo, has definitely prioritized the use of artillery as that was commonplace for pre-World War One and World War One and post-World War One. The idea of lightning warfare does not exist yet. So, you're not going to have tanks. You will technically have tanks, but they're not the same tanks like you would think of. Like, if you think of tanks, you think of Panzers, you think of M1 Abrams, you think of a lot of Panthers, Leopards, all that kind of stuff. You think of T-34s, you think of all the big players in the tank game. Unfortunately, those don't exist in this. What does exist is called a land ship. A land ship is pretty much a tank, but without the tank. It is, well, technically it is a tank without the gun on it. Now, the guns they have are machine guns, primarily belt-fed guns. Nothing too high-tech. There is no shells that are going to be coming out of these things, and they're just not well, and practical in a modern setting, not very useful, but in this mod in particular, is a game changer. In fact, when you finally get land ships, it's pretty much game over for everybody else. Now, land ships don't come in until very, very late in the game. Let's see if I can't find them. Armored cars are also very good. Now, land ships, 2, 3. Let's see, where is the land ships? So the first land ships come from, looks like Russia, very, very, very beginning, which is an assault unit. Let's see, land ships. The first ships will be from the British, the Germans. So as you can see, they're just standard, pretty much box vehicles with guns sticking out of them. And the French model, which is the highest tech that you can get, which can be built into the Rheinland, which are your technical pre-war tanks that used a very modest light cannon in it, like an artillery cannon in it, but it was still technically, pretty basic. Now, America does get the Mark V, which we can get into the Liberty tank. Now, the Liberty tank is a very, very, very large tank. Now, as you can see, the defense and movement is all messed up. Technically, this is supposed to be attack defense. So it'll have a defense rating of 10 and an 18 rated attack. Makes things very, very fun, very, very interesting. Now, America will not have any access to the Rhinelands, as we will get the Liberty tanks instead. But it doesn't usually come out until here, and we only have, well, technically we do have the Rhinelands, but we have the export variant, which is not very good in a sense, like 18 and 8, 18 attack, 18 defense, versus the normal Rheinland tank, which is a 18-8. And it's pretty much the same thing, but we don't really need them because we would have the Liberty tank, so it'll be definitely better defense, and it has 7 health. So we will have access to both, but Liberty tanks is what I'll be prioritizing if we make it to this part. Now, we will also have access to the Langley in the very late game, which is a very, very, very early carrier. And all this stuff, all pretty cool things. I think World of Warships definitely captures some of these ships. Not all of them, I don't think, are all accessible to World of Warships. But if you are very, very knowledgeable of history and of that kind of stuff, you kind of get a general idea. Being placed in this whole thing, you can imagine the power that they have in the game. Now, artillery is king, ships are king in World War I, definitely a big thing, and it actually hammers it down. So the units may not sound very, very, very strong, but in comparison to very, very late game artillery and late game ships, you definitely understand that you'll be having a better time taking the coasts than you will be taking the inland. But yes, it is. It is definitely a fun time in the late game. Early game, though, I have more fun and enjoyment in because everything is still very, very slow, very fast in parts. Depending if you rush things, blitzing through everything. Mid game is alright, but the problem between the early game and the mid game is the fact that everybody declares war on each other and everybody has a pact with each other. So you can attack a nation thinking that you can get a head start in war, but sometimes, 9 times out of 10, during the mid game, you're going to be fighting like 3 other people. And then at the very late game, it won't matter how many people you have to fight. You have good enough tech, you'll have good enough everything that it just does not matter anymore. So it definitely does snowball. And that's pretty much what you kind of hope for and wait for a lot, is the snowball effect to really kick in to make the game really more entertaining and a lot more fun. Now, I don't really need to spend most of my time waiting to just strike down the capital. I don't really need to take Tokyo yet. Uh, all the other cities down in the south are also weak, and I'm gonna move down here next turn. The biggest problem though is the hills and the forest here will also eat away a turn of movement, and as a penalty, and I don't care too much for the penalties and stuff. So we'll go ahead and put more stock exchanges and a lot of uh, very useful products, just so that we can have a lot more money. Now, in the base game, you'll have a big problem in the base game when it comes to money. A lot of gold per turn, so to speak. Now on here it says Alliance. My game UI is bugged for this mod, so things are kind of all over the place. But it's not roughly the case. I kind of know what each thing says, so it doesn't it's not gonna impede how I will be going through the game. But let's see. As you can see, the Japanese Navy is starting to build up down here and moving in from the south and moving up towards the north because of my holdings up here is definitely a cause for concern for Tokyo. And since it's being navally bombarded, they're going to try and move their ships into the port to block all the incoming naval bombardment and soak the damage so that their defenders won't take too much damage. Now I'm going to try and halt as much as I can, especially big ships, which will be very, very, very it can get very, very rough sometimes with some combat. And there is a definite struggle for things. Let's see. We'll go ahead with stock exchange here. Now, money is the power in this game too. Keep that in mind. You can have a very large navy, but what really makes a navy strong in this mod is the is how much of an impact you can push them out for. So you can wipe away a lot of enemy ships with relative ease, but it won't matter much if you have no economy to push it out. Push out the necessary economic economic strain, basically. In normal base game Civ, there is a big problem with treasury, where if you build too many units, you'll run out of money very quickly, and the game can't process. Now, it's generally fine to not have money in the base game if you don't like trading, because sometimes you can buy tech, you can buy resources, buy luxuries to make sure that your people stay happy. In this mod, money is not that. In this mod, money is tribute to make sure bigger powers stay off you if you play as a miner. But the biggest thing about money is your production speed. As you can probably tell in this video already, I have purchased a lot, a few times already, to the point where I've run out of money in some cases, and I'm letting it pile back up. Now, money is power in the sense of military gains. If you go to war, you want to have as much units that you can work with as possible to not just prolong the war, but to get it over with. Now, fighting AI is definitely different than playing against a player who generally probably won't think the same way you do. So keep that in momentary mind as I explain this, but the biggest thing about money in this is pushing units out very quickly to organize and keep things sort of in a position of your own advantages. Um, Having more money means having more units, and since there is no maintenance penalties in this mod, there is technically, if you can actually successfully get through the threshold of what would dictate having a lost net worth in unit to maintenance capacity, which believe me can happen in the very late game, but it surprises me when I reach it because not it doesn't oftentimes do it. Now, in base game, what determines maintenance to production of unit count is having a uh, having more units than the government can take. So all of it is effectively ran through military. So having too much military can weigh and bog down your maintenance, and can lead to a lot of issues with upgrading units, buying units out, buying buildings out, buying improvements out. So it all comes full circle around. Now, in this mod, you don't have to worry about it necessarily. So it definitely is a big change if you're a very Civ 3 player and you don't play with modifications like this. Which I do recommend. Some modifications for this game is actually pretty addicting. I think I have played this mod more times than the actual base game itself. So it's always something to remind me that maybe I play this game a little too much sometimes. But other times I tend to block that out. um, it definitely does kind of hit differently sometimes, depending on situations and stuff. Now, you don't want to just attack into things with a weak unit. You definitely want to have a unit that actually has a lot of HP and buffers because you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Nothing is generally guaranteed. It's still a dice roll at the end of the day. And sometimes the dice are not fair and can lead to some very, very hit or miss situations that, generally speaking, not very fun. There is no fun moment where you think you have a victory, in which case you lose. It's just not very fun at all. Now, the thing with Japan is that since everything is treated as industry, technically, if Japan takes China or takes any parts of Manchuria, takes parts of Siberia, they can still make their high-end units because they don't have any colonial units. So, to make up for the lack of having overseas stuff, it can get very rough fighting Japan in the late game because they will have access to everything no matter where they are at any given point in time, which kind of makes things, I admit, very, very straining, and it can be very, very hard. Very, 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 very hard. Now, there is a plus side to having that, especially if you play as the Japanese nation, in which you don't have to worry about it. But I will say it is relatively easy mode. Meiji Restoration is very overpowered, and El Justo is not looking to nerf that or give Japan any overseas units because it's never necessarily had overseas units. It stayed in blissful isolation for a very, very long time until the very much midway through World War One, or at the very beginning, whichever one it was, where they took territory from Germany, in which it didn't really need to take any more. So that is definitely something to keep in mind when fighting against Japan. You'll be fighting pretty much losing battle after losing battle after losing battle in the late game until you have just enough navy to wipe out their navy and leave them pretty much isolated on the home islands, and all their colonial holdings are pretty much left to die because they can't reinforce those cities with anything. And getting those ships out means no steam transports, which means all the units they make in their colonies can't come back home to defend the home islands and make things very, very rough for them. So you kind of have to pin them down to take them down. Now, fighting them in the early game before they even have those kind of things definitely is the ideal situation you want to have, where you can kind of wound them, weaken them, kind of push them down before they can get up when the race starts. So it's definitely an ideal situation, regardless, depending on whether or not you can actually hold the lines and get lucky on rolls, since everything is by chance, by an internal dice rolling system. It can make for some complicated scenarios to happen. And what I mean by that is that Civ 3 does work on a dice rolling system of sorts, as I call it, because it does not matter what unit you have. It does not matter how strong that unit is. That unit can be easily countered, whether you want it to or not, and can make for some very, very agonizing, cursed events to happen, such as the classic Spearman defeats Tank, which was a running gag on the forums after somebody posted a picture, I think, or a video of their Spearman destroying a tank, which nobody at all expected something like that before, as it was pretty much fundamentally impossible, but the internal dice rolling system has made it such possibilities. So that is definitely a humorous moment, but can definitely happen here. But I am going to finish up this episode at the end of this turn, and at the very beginning of the next turn, I will pick this up sometime, maybe tomorrow or whatever, depending on how my channel is reacted to, or how people view this video. I will either do more or I will do less. I know I do a lot of hardcore WoW content for classic WoW and stuff, and I definitely am still doing that. This is not a drastic change. This is just me changing up the flow of videos that I'm publishing out on my channel. I do want to nail down that I am variety. I don't want to stick to one thing and drive myself crazy with it, because a lot of YouTubers generally do that in the most part, and their channels kind of hit very, very rocky positions if they are too late to change up their flow of content, or if they give viewers the wrong impression. I don't want to be known as that guy who plays WoW all the time. There's already too many of those online. I don't need to be another brick in the wall. So I am going to finish up this episode right now and going to set all my stuff, and I will save it, and I will continue this next time. So until next time, my friends, I hope to see you all in the next video. Whether it be WoW or whether it be this, I hope everybody has a good day and to have good vibes, watch funny videos, and roughly have less strain in your life, because we don't need more of that, right? We only need good vibes. And until next time, my friends, peace out.